Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for allowing me to be here and have the honour of addressing this conference. As Anne said, I previously served as a minister in the UK government, and I was the Minister for Modern Slavery. And that meant that I had the again, honour working with Theresa May, who was then Home Secretary, of bringing in the Modern Slavery Bill as it was, taking it through Parliament and creating what became the Modern Slavery Act. And I think the lessons I learned from how you can bring in a piece of law like the Modern Slavery Act, which was really revolutionary at the time we did it, and includes provisions that we didn't think as ministers we could get through the rest of our government, means that this can be done and that real action can be taken. As Anne says, I now co-chair what's called the All-Party Parliamentary Group in the UK Parliament on human trafficking and modern slavery. And that means that we are a group of all party, means we are across the spectrum of politics. We cannot form as a group unless we have members of all parties from Parliament, and we're from both houses of Parliament. So not just the House of Commons, where the elected MPs sit, but also the House of Lords, where our appointed upper house sits. And we are all parliamentarians with a real interest in this area, and we see it as our duty to try to help to educate other parliamentarians who, simply as any parliamentarian will know, your demands on your time to be able to focus on issues are really, really difficult and really hard pushed, and we see it as our duty to help people. The point of this conference is the interaction between modern slavery or human trafficking and illicit finance. And I think that would be my first point I would make, that too often human trafficking, the movement of people, is seen through the prism of immigration. It's seen through the prism as a crime of migration. It isn't a crime of migration. It is an economic crime. These are people who are exploited. They are used and abused so someone can make money from them. We understand and appreciate when drug trafficking happens that it's the people, it's a financial crime. We understand when it's firearms and weapons. But this is people, and people being used so somebody else can make money. And I think in the UK what we've identified, and the reason we call it modern slavery in the UK, is that actually last year more than half of the victims that were identified by our law enforcement agencies were actually UK nationals. They were not people who had been migrated into the UK illegally or legally. They were UK nationals with UK passports, UK driving licences, the ability to live and work in the UK in any way that they saw fit. But they were abused in forms of labour exploitation, sexual exploitation, domestic servitude and forced marriage. And Anne talked about the largest number. There are estimated to be 40 million people across the world who are victims of modern slavery. 25 million victims of forced labour, 15 million victims of forced marriage. And it is happening in every single town, city, village. It is happening everywhere. It is happening at the nail bar, at the hand car wash. It is happening in restaurants. It is happening where there is where people can be exploited, where people can be used, perhaps because of their immigration status, but not necessarily. So what do we do to break the business chain, the business model? Because that's what we've got to do. We've got to stop the money. We've got to stop the demand for cheap labour. We've got to stop the demand for cheap products. And we have to make sure that where people are financially benefiting, criminals are financially benefiting on the back of other human beings, that we can seize their assets. And what we did in the Modern Slavery Act was we tried to bring in a number of measures that could help with that, including making it easier for law enforcement and other agencies to seize financial assets, including finding ways to introduce civil orders so that we could try and stop people becoming victims in a criminal way earlier, because the level of proof is obviously lower with a civil offence rather than a criminal offence. And we also introduced what was probably the hardest thing to bring into the Act, which is now Section 54 of the Act, and it's this transparency in supply chains measure. And that measure is about making sure that business takes responsibility for its supply chains and the products that it sells, and it gives consumers the knowledge that they need to have that the products they're buying do not have slavery within the supply chains. And we appreciate supply chains are complicated. Supply chains are really difficult. They are, I actually sit on a board that looks at the supply chains into the Houses of Parliament in the UK, and we can see just how difficult it is because of the many layers that there are in any supply chain. But we have to take our best endeavours to make sure we go through those supply chains. And it's been really fascinating today actually listening to some of the contributions, all the contributions, but those contributions around the way that finance works and how we might be able to use financial modelling and data to be able to identify where slavery might be happening so we can help businesses to root it out of their supply chains. I would also say that if anybody wants to look at this crime and work out how to bring perpetrators to justice, it cannot be done without looking at the victims and without making this a victim-centred approach. Having someone admit that they have been a victim of slavery, that they have been abused to the extent that they are a slave, is an incredibly difficult thing for anyone. But we can't get the prosecutions without the testimony of those victims. So having the most humane and sensitive approach to victims, making sure that they have the support they need. And we don't go far enough in the UK at the moment, I'll freely tell you that. But we do know that that has to be the approach. Just a few final points. Anne said that this was one of the biggest global issues. It's the intersection, actually, of our global issues. It's the intersection where you have the opportunity for organised criminality, terrorist organisations, and even and also climate change. Human trafficking is happening. I was very lucky to be in Glasgow a few weeks ago at the COP26 conference, and I was very keen to make sure that we discussed that intersection between human trafficking and climate change, because climate change is both cause and effect. Anne said 40% of all deforestation across the world is carried out by victims of forced labour. But they are victims of forced labour because climate change has forced them to be unable to make their living in the way they used to. And they are therefore forced to leave their homes. Nobody, imagine leaving your home. Imagine what it feels like to be somebody who feels that the only thing you can do for the future of you and your family is to up sticks and leave your home. Nobody would ever do that through choice. And the fact that there are people who can then exploit you to then carry out actions that make climate change worse for others, it has to be something that we take seriously. And I give you some figures in terms of the way that this issue is viewed by international organisations. Spending by UNHCR is $10 billion a year. Spending on AIDS by UN agencies is $29 billion a year. Spending by UN agencies on human trafficking is $500 million a year. Now, if we could change that focus, and if we could get the organisations and governments and countries around the world to start to look at human trafficking and modern slavery as the first point they look at, then actually so many of the other issues that we're spending billions and billions and billions of pounds on, and I don't in any way say that we shouldn't be spending the money we are on the UNHCR or on AIDS. Absolutely we should, but we should be spending more on modern slavery and human trafficking because it will save us money in the long run. And I can tell you that from the UK. We saw 27 migrants drown travelling between France and the UK in a very, very unsafe vessel only 2 weeks ago. That happened because people smugglers, people traffickers said that there was an opportunity and desperate people were prepared to pay money, sometimes around £800 per person, it's estimated 800 UK pounds, to get on one of those boats that are not seaworthy, that are simply unsafe. Now, if we can tackle that problem at source, then we won't have those people needing to get on those boats. So that's why I absolutely support the campaign to make this a focus of the next UN General Assembly. I'll finish with just something I noticed outside. I saw there are many statues outside this wonderful building, and one of them had a quote on it, and I was Googling who the quote came from. Thank goodness we have Google, because it was then able to tell me that no one really knows where the quote came from. But it was certainly used by an abolitionist in the 1800s, Wendell Phillips. And the quote is, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Now, nothing could be further from the truth when it comes to the protection of human beings. And I would ask all of us to make sure we have eternal vigilance so that we can stamp out this heinous crime. Thank you.